ready to go. So when I look at how can you make money from photography, I guess the first one that I don't have here is you can run workshops and write books for other photographers. And I'm sure many people actually make a living out of that these days. But the main opportunities that are out there, obviously, a photographer for hire, whether portraits, weddings, products, and that's, a lot of people make their money that way. Stock photography is maybe the second one, and then the creation and sale of photographic prints, whether online or through a gallery or art show, is the third one. And what I'm going to be talking about today is primarily the stock photography, but I'll also cover the photographic prints part of this as well. So what is a stock photo? Well, it's a photograph that's already been created and it's available to meet the needs of a designer or an editor rather than them commission a particular photograph. Maybe 20 years ago, when magazines and newspapers had a lot more money, they would commission photographers to take the sort of images that they want. Now what everyone wants is just online, it's already been taken. I can use it. It's sort of maybe not exactly what I wanted, but it's good enough, and off they go. And they're available for web use, prints, calendars, greeting cards, magazines, news outlets, advertising, products, a very wide range of uses of stock photography. And this is an even cheesier version of the classic lady smiling with a headset image. That's one of mine that sort of sells from time to time, I guess, of an elderly man working in a, hospital or something, call center. But they're much broader than that. Images are what people think of when you think of stock photography. But this picture was one, it was almost a grab shot as I was walking on the seafront at Waikiki and saw these colorful surfboards up against the blue sky. And I thought, oh, that looks nice. I'll take a picture of that, and uploaded it to the stock agencies as I did. And that particular one has earned $1,720 since I took it. And it's all over the place. Here's a couple of websites that I found, one in San Diego. I don't know what this killer summer workouts are. So people obviously are using it because it gives a nice, happy sort of summery feel. And once I'd got it, I obviously could extract the images from the background, which is this one in the bottom right, and that sold for $414. Then I stick it on different things: big waves, flat water, nice beach with sand, vertical version of the beach with sand. So altogether, it's probably, that one picture has probably earned something like $3,560 since I took it. So it definitely paid for the little walk along the beach in Waikiki. My bestseller happens to be a cat. And you can't, there's so many cats on the internet. It's sort of hard to imagine that, my bestseller is a cat, but it's the picture on the right. And there's one typical use of it, animals on the other side. And that one, it was uploaded to 18 stock sites in 2011, and I'll talk about the number of sites a little later. And it sold 4,247 times for a total income of 4,607, which gives you an idea that, well, about $1 a sale, is that all a photo is worth these days? And this is where the professional photographers who, used to make good money in stock and used to make $500 or $1,000 from licensing a stock image, they obviously, in their minds, the whole industry has disappeared. They used to make that much money. Now they make $1 or even less. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of not surprising that you get that view from the traditional professional photographer. And it's sort of thinking about the good old days. It was done on film, obviously. Film photography was more difficult, I believe, than digital photography. The stock agencies had to have prints and negatives they searched through. They had to take a copy of the negative to send it to the user. Magazines and newspapers made profits in those days. And the images were licensed for one specific use under a license that was called rights managed. So you would license an image for a half-page cover of a magazine, for instance, and they couldn't use it for anything else. It was licensed for that specific use. If the magazine wanted to use it again, they had to pay again. So it was very much an environment that the photographers liked at that stage. But to be honest, it's sort of all behind us now. And you can argue why that was. I think it's partly digital, it's partly the internet, it's partly that images are just a free download away via Google Images. There's a lot of high quality images these days. I think 3 million images of cats on Shutterstock. The industry is global now, and so contributors in Thailand or countries where the cost of living is lower are happy to work for less money, and they can take a picture of a cat just as easily as I can. There are then free stock sites that are floating about where photographers appear to be willing to work for exposure, as the common phrase goes. And there are a lot of pretty reasonable images, some very good images available on free stock sites. So you've got this tremendous supply of images, many of them or some of them free of charge. Some of them aren't really free, but people download them anyway. But set against that, there are many more uses of images. So there, you've got this two things happening at the same time. So there are websites, blogs, online news, ads. You see pictures on everything that you see, that pops up on your phone. And so there are a lot more users of these images at the same time as there's a lot more supply. The other point about stock photography is that the images are licensed. People use the word sold as a shorthand, but strictly speaking, they are licensed for a particular use. The stock agencies themselves are generally non-exclusive. There are some exclusive ones, but generally they're non-exclusive, which means the same image can go to different agencies. And what they're offering is basically a digital download of the image together with the license to use that image. So there's no actual limit to the number of times an image can be licensed. As you saw with the cat, it's 4,200 and something times. And images can continue to sell for years after they were first uploaded. So yes, they start to sell less because the quality isn't necessarily as good as it is now. But this pretty horrible sort of photograph, binoculars with some sunset sort of composited into the glass, was uploaded in 2008, and it still sells from time to time. I don't think it's particularly good, but it meets the needs of someone. And if that's the case, then they license it and I get the money. The licensing arrangement that people now almost always employ is something called a royalty-free license, which is a silly name in the sense that it's not royalty-free. It's not free. The royalty-free bit simply meant that you can license it to someone for a particular use, but they can use it multiple times. So, there's no track of where it's used. It simply now sits in their, database somewhere. And if they want to use it again for it to illustrate another story, then they can. But basically, they are licensed for web use, which tends to be relatively small images, print use, bigger images, and then resale or product use. So if my cat is used on a bag of cat food, they need a much more expensive license than, one that's just an image somewhere on a vet's website or something. And increasingly, people buy images as part of a subscription plan. And the Shutterstock is the example there, 750 downloads for a month for $199 a month. And the photographer gets a percentage of that, somewhere around 35%, I think, with Shutterstock. So you can either get from 10 cents to $1, maybe, depending on how much the buyer paid. But if, as I said, if this little cat appears on a bag of cat food, then I get a higher, it's called an enhanced or an extended license. And I might get between $20 and $120, depending on which site they buy it from and how it's going to be used. So there's a tremendous range of values from 2 or 3 cents maybe to several $100s, depending on the agency, what license people are, or what they're going to use it for. And you've really got to be happy to accept 2 cents. Some people think my photo's worth a lot more than 2 cents. I'm not going to do this for 2 cents. And to my mind, it's a photo. It's sometimes it will go for 2 cents, sometimes $20, sometimes $100. And to me, it's what I earn at the end of the month that's actually important. I don't feel so attached to this little picture that if somebody buys it for 2 cents, then I think, oh, okay, that's all right. It's just one of those things. And so mentally, if you think of going into this, you need to be able to handle that. And not everybody can, or not everyone's sort of happy with it. So I think across my entire portfolio, the average income per image sale is about 85 cents. Now, it used to be more. I'll tell the honest truth. The photographers back in 2002 or 3 that were making $500, then maybe when this whole microstock stuff came up in 2005, 2006, people were making some pretty good money because there were very few images available. So although they were being sold for not much money, there wasn't much supply. Therefore, the first photographers in 2004 or 5 actually made quite a lot of money. I joined in 2008. And already people were saying, we're past the good old days of microstock photography. And it's sort of been going down in terms of the amount of money per image, but I've been increasing the number of images. And as I'll come on to, that's meant that the amount of money that I earn has actually been going up, even though the amount per image is sort of going down at the same time. As I say,
Steve, just to share real quickly, I have nowhere near the number of photos that you have up. I average 33 cents per photo sale.
Oh, so, okay.
So that puts it in perspective. And I have not been doing stock photo work as long as you have. And in fact, what happens, I saw your presentation and that got me started.
Oh, okay, right. Oh, well.
So, personal testimony.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. As I say, so you can go from 2, 3, 4 cents to $250 or more. And that could be for the same image. It's not like I've got a really good image that sells for a lot of money and I've got a whole lot of rubbish that's 4 cents. The same image can go for this very wide range. So, if you want to get into stock photography, you've got to accept the current market realities of that. So what can you sell? People, obviously. Places, and I heard you were going to go down to the cherry blossoms. There's one to aim for, a cherry blossom picture. And things. In terms of the legal aspects, I'll come on to examples of those things. In the US, at any rate, people have no general right to privacy in a public place. Animals have no right to privacy at all. So if you see a nice cat, you can sort of take it. And so images of a copyrighted building or a statue or a person taken from a public location doesn't actually need any sort of, the person whose photo is being taken doesn't need to give their agreement to that. And as I understand the law, that image can be happily used on your own website and sold by you as a fine art print. But it's the publishing of an image that brings potential issues. And when you think of the word publishing, it's like the publisher of a newspaper. It's not putting it on a website. It's not actually putting it on a stock agency. It's putting the image in front of the general public that is the publishing of the image. And that's where the potential issues come. And so the publisher is the person at risk of being sued, not actually the photographer, although that's not to say a photographer couldn't be caught up in it somehow, but strictly speaking, the publisher of an image is the one at risk of a lawsuit. And so there are two categories of stock photography. One is called editorial, and that's for things that are news-related, educational textbooks, and in things like that, permission from the subject is not needed. And the second use is commercial, which doesn't mean you're being paid. It's a sort of usage category. It means that someone is using it to advocate for a position or a product. So like using it for a political advert, or using it to sell a product or to sell a hotel or something like that. And in a commercial usage, a recognizable person must sign a model release. Recognizable products like a can of Coke must be released by the owner of that trademark or the copyright. Buildings are a bit sort of less clear. The design of some modern buildings are sort of carefully controlled, but the vast majority of buildings that are out there, no one particularly cares. No one's going to sue you over a picture of a 30-year-old building or something like that. And so a release is a legal document giving the photographer the right to publish a likeness. And so there's a model release, which a person would sign, and it's the right to use an image of a person in the photograph. And a property release is the right to use a likeness of a building, an art product, or a art object, I should say, or a recognizable product. And the stock agencies require releases to protect both themselves as well as their customers, the people actually buying the image. So if I take a picture of myself and upload it to a stock agency, they need to see a model release signed by me. The buyer doesn't see that, but the stock agency needs to see that that is in place and that it's been signed and witnessed by someone and so on. So an image like this, which is clearly Air France and there's people about, and it can be used for editorial purposes about the landing at this little airport in St. Martin. And it doesn't need a release from anyone. I don't have to go and ask Air France if I can use that picture. It can be used to illustrate an article about the difficulties of landing at this airport, for instance. This one, the editorial usage could include a travel article about Ocean City and the boardwalk, or an article about the issues of obesity. But if the publisher used it on a website promoting slimming products, with obviously these two people in it, then they could certainly be in trouble. So the fact these two people were in a public place and I was in a public place means that they can't object to the use of that in an article about Ocean City. So again, that's editorial usage. And there's actually a big market for editorial images, whether it's, places of or pictures of the various stores that are around, or, credit cards sort of usage. So any of these can sell and do sell when people want to write about PetSmart or Home Goods or Best Buy. They would just pick one of these images up and sort of illustrate their article with one of these.
We have a couple of questions, if I can.
Yes.
One question is, how different is compensation for editorial versus commercial?
It's pretty much the same these days. The compensation depends more on the agency rather than the type of usage. So it on Shutterstock, which is one of the biggest, there's no difference at all between one with a model release and one without.
And then the second question has to do with releases. And just for clarity's sake, let's assume they're talking about a model release. Okay, can you use the same release for, let's say, multiple stock agencies, or does each agency have its own release?
You can use the same one. There was one that Getty produced and is available as a free download from their site, and it has got the information that everyone else needs. So you don't have to use a specific one from the Shutterstock site. So you just need a model release signed and witnessed, and generally speaking, that would then be acceptable by all the agencies.
So one other question asked by William.
And there are electronic versions as well. You can get an app that, I forget what it's called now, but there's an app that you could get someone to sign on your phone or an iPad that also is acceptable.
Yeah. William writes, on the first picture, the plane landing, it did not seem that anyone was recognizable. Would a release be needed for commercial use?
On this one, yeah, that's true. The people aren't recognizable, particularly because they're all sort of facing away. And in fact, I did create, it's not in this pack, but I did create a version of this picture. I think the aeroplane was a bit further out to sea, where I was able to remove the Air France logo. So it became a nondescript aircraft, you know, coming into land over the sea. And there was just the backs of the people looking out to sea. And that was okay for commercial use. This is editorial because of the product in effect, the company name, not the people. So this is the Air France logo and Air France name and all the rest of it that makes this editorial.
And William, I can add just a little bit more detail. I had a photo that was originally rejected at Getty because the model, it was a workout picture, had a Nike swoosh on her shoes.
Yes.
and so part of the advice that I got later on was anything that is a brand label will almost always be kicked back for commercials from commercial stock.
Yes.
Editorial, different story.
Yeah. And you can remove those little things. So it's not that the shoe, I mean, you could argue the shoe is recognizable by a Nike designer. Is it recognizable by the general public is actually the test. So as long as you remove the little Nike sort of swoop thing, then you're okay, because the general public doesn't recognize one, you know, sneaker from another. And this particular one is a commercial usage. Well, actually, this was my house, and so I was able to give a property release for the house because the house belonged to me. But there are no identifiable marks on the truck that's there. And so the truck originally had the name and it had little things down here. And so, in Photoshop, I removed all of those personally identifiable things, and then it became okay for commercial use. And then it's been used on this East Coast irrigation landscaping company down in Florida, pretending that they actually did this work, I guess. But there's the truck, and there's another version of it being used commercially to advertise this company down in Florida.
Now, Steve, we have another question, but I think I'm positive that it's a topic that you're going to cover later. And they're asking about, do you have to assign search terms or categories for each photograph? And
I will cover that.
Cover that.
Yeah.
I'm just warning you.
Yeah. Okay.
They've asked. So.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So when a model release is required? Yes, here. Here, because the person is sort of recognizable, the one with the shaver on the side, but not here, because these are all back views of people, and there's nothing sort of identifiable. The words are generic words. It doesn't particularly refer to anything at all. And so this one quite happily can be used by this old Irwin Lodge. Even though this wasn't taken at the old Irwin Lodge, no one seemed to care about that. So as long as, it looks like something you could do if you went to that lodge, that's sort of acceptable. So how have I got on doing this? And what I did from way back in 2010 was I was so fed up of people saying, this is fantastic, you can make so much money at stock photography. And you had no idea whether they were telling the truth or what they were earning or how much they thought so much money was. So way back in 2010, or thereabouts on my blog, I started publishing my earnings. And so you can sort of see there was like a glory days of stock photography, maybe through to 2013. Then it, you know, like a couple of years where it went down. Then it sort of got better. Now 2021, it sort of went down a bit. And also this is split between photos and videos. I started taking stock videos. I mean, you can see there's a few through all these years, but I started taking it more seriously perhaps in 2017, 2018. And I'll cover videos a little bit later about why that's sort of interesting. But as you can see, it's sort of gone to 35, 36,000 down to 32, 33, more than enough to pay for new camera bodies and lenses. And, you know, if you do your taxes properly, trips to places to take photographs. And so, you know, you can get this income, but also you can set a reasonable set of expenses against it. So you don't actually pay tax on all of this. You pay tax on the profit that the business makes. And this is, you know, I'm not saying you can read this on the screen, I'm sure, but this shows all the different agencies that I've been submitting to over the years. We've got Shutterstock at the bottom in red, and showing how that sort of going down over time. They're taking some very aggressive approaches with the contributors, which have got some contributors really worked up and some left. And so Shutterstock's one of the least liked companies in the industry just at the moment. iStock, which is owned by Getty, is the green one. And for me, that's been improving recently. So that's sort of almost become a better company. The one that generally everyone likes these days is Adobe stock, which is the purplish one. I'm going up from the bottom. They bought a company called Fotolia maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I've done some pretty reasonable things for contributors. If you sell above, I don't know how many downloads it is, they give you a free copy or a free license for the Adobe products. So, you know, Photoshop, Lightroom, and those sorts of things. So they've been taking an interesting approach, I think, to contributors or to photographers. And then there's a whole series of smaller agencies that basically I just upload but don't pay any more attention to. So I obviously track the earnings once a month, but I don't particularly pay much attention to them. But $20 here, $40 here each month, when you've got 8 or 10 sites doing that, it sort of turns into real money, if you see what I mean. So as long as it's not too much effort, and I think I talk a little bit about how that's done shortly, then I just upload the same images to all of the agencies. Even though they may only earn $20, it didn't cost me anything really to put it there. So, okay, I'll go with that. In terms of images, I've got about 17,000 images now. This little graph at the bottom shows, can I read it? The red one is Shutterstock. The purple one at the top is a company called Deposit Photos. The one at the bottom is Adobe stock. And you can actually see when I think Adobe bought Fotolia, because Fotolia for some reason kept rejecting a lot of my images. And so you can see there's a flat line for a time. And then Adobe took them over and were much more welcoming of whatever I was doing. And so I tried to catch up with, uploading my backlog, the ones that had previously been rejected. And so that's how I got up there. But Adobe doesn't really accept as many editorial images as the others. So these top two are more around the size of my portfolio. The difference is Deposit Photos rejects almost nothing, Shutterstock has started rejecting what they call similars. So if you send 5 images of a waterfall, they might take 2 of them and reject 3 because they're similar to the others. It's just, go with the flow. It is what it is. Now, why do I upload to so many?
No, I'm sorry. There's a question that came up, which you touched on a little bit, but I guess, can you be more explicit? We have a question, can I submit the same image to different agencies? And also related to that, it's not just submitting to the same photo to multiple agencies and the first one that accepts it gets it, but you can have the same photo with 8 different agencies, right? So
yes, that's what I meant by non-exclusive. You can submit the same photo to all of the agencies, and it doesn't matter whether they accept it or reject it, that you've just submitted it, and it will be online on 10 of them, 12 of them, 15 of them. And that ties into this little picture here of the cat. The cat was very successful on Shutterstock. It earned 3,480 of its 4,000 whatever on Shutterstock, but not particularly successful on Adobe Stock, for instance. It's only sold 14 times on Adobe Stock. And there's no obvious reason for that. I mean, it's just that the cat caught on Shutterstock, and the more it sold, the higher it appears in the search order. The higher it's on the search order, the more likely it is to sell again. And you can't control that. It's sort of, random and all sorts of things, I guess. And so supplying the same image to multiple agencies increases the chance that it will actually take off on one particular agency, and hence earn a pretty reasonable amount of money. If I hadn't put it on Shutterstock, I would not be talking about the image at all, because it would have earned $1,000 or something in 10 years. So it's, from that point of view, important to get it on multiple sites. The other thing about sites is there's little evidence that a typical buyer shops around. I think a typical buyer has an account with an agency, and that's where they buy things. So if you've got an account with Alamy, which is one of the more expensive sort of agencies, and they provide more services to people, to the buyers, than maybe the others. As you can see, this picture of a different aircraft landing at St. Martin, I sold 4 times, but for almost $300 on Alamy. And at the other sites, it sort of sold for 80 cents and 35 cents and things like that. So the buyer of this, who paid obviously a lot more than the $290, because I only get a fraction of what they pay, does not go and search on Dreamstime in order to get the same image for 35 cents. Even though theoretically they could, it's just they have an account there, and the bosses tell them that's where they get their photos, and so that's where they get their photos. So I'm sure there is some shopping about, but largely I think the bigger buyers just buy from where they've got an account. Maybe they've an account with 2 places, possibly. So this putting it on a place that sells it for $200, and somewhere else that sells it for $1, doesn't mean that you've lost the $200 sale. At least that's, I've tried to investigate that and do some research. That's the best I could understand of that.
So, Steve, a couple of questions around pricing and tracking your fees, or tracking your sales. A couple of questions that I'll just sort of summarize to say, how do you track how your photos are doing? And is there an app that you use to track the performance of your photos with various agencies?
Okay, so a 2-part answer. At the end of each month, I keep an Excel spreadsheet of what I earned in each agency for that month. And that's where the various charts come from, and, typical Excel charts that we all know. And so that's sort of like a and I can use it for tax reasons as well, because not every agency sends a 1099 form. So, that basically tells me how much the agencies have paid me. But there is an application called MicroStocker Pro, which I think I may have a slide coming up, but I can, explain it later. That goes to currently 12 of my agencies, certainly the biggest agencies, and it goes there every 4 hours and downloads a little thumbnail of what is sold. So any day I can look and say, I've made $80 today, and these are the images that actually sold on each of the different agencies. And that's actually quite helpful, because if you sometimes look at these thumbnails and think, well, I'd forgotten that one. I could actually redo that now, because, let's say we'll do it with a person with a COVID mask on. So it sort of helps generate some new ideas by seeing what people are actually buying on a day-by-day basis. So I generally look at that, if I'm sitting at my computer 2 or 3 times a day, just to, see what's selling and whether that generates any ideas that I'll go forward with.
So one other question has come up about pricing while you're talking about this. And could you give an idea of, and again, it's going to vary from agency to agency, but let's suppose you have a picture of your cat. And how much does that picture sell for if I'm downloading it to simply put it in a PowerPoint presentation, or I shouldn't say sell for, license, versus if I'm putting it on a corporate website, versus if I'm putting it on the cover of a best-selling book?
I think the ones where it's just on a website are going to be the ones that, and this hinges on, are they working for, is this person, this buyer, working for a company and they've got a subscription plan and they take, 200 images a month, then I might get 15 cents. If it's a person that sees that cat and think that would be, they're a vet and they think that would be perfect for my website, that I treat cats and things, they are probably buying it on a one-off basis. They don't have a subscription because they don't use that many stock photos. So they maybe pay $5 or $10 and I might get $2 or $3. And then you go all the way up to, and I sold the cat recently and I was paid $70, which probably means the person paid $350. I don't know how they've used it, but I can imagine that it was a maximum resolution sort of product type usage. So it's that very wide range, depending on, do they have a subscription? Are they buying it one-off? Are they buying it for, a very large print run? Because print runs sometimes come into this as well. But as a photographer, it's almost best not to worry about it, because you can't do anything about it. You can't, stop it selling in one particular way or try to encourage it being sold in another. It's what it is, and that's what I look at. I rarely, worry about, well, have they got the right license? I have no idea. There's no way to actually check it, to be honest. It's sort of, because it's out so many times, it would be impossible to say whether someone had bought the right license in the first place. It's just, it is how it is, really.
Yeah, there's a great example to illustrate this. Probably 90% of the people in this session are familiar with that very popular meme that came out maybe 2 years ago called Distracted Boyfriend. Where the guy is with the girl and his head is turned, looking at a cute blonde going by. Well, that's a stock photo. Yes. And the photographer who's out of Barcelona has used that couple, an Italian male who goes, his model name is Mario, and a Spanish female, her model name is Laura. And he's shot, like, I don't know, 800, 900 photos that are on stock sites of those two doing a variety of things, proposing, making up, holding a baby, buying a house, filing for divorce, you know.
Yes.
And that meme became so popular that a lot of people just downloaded it. Of course, he never got back money from it.
Yes, yeah, and he probably lost all future sales.
Yeah.
One last little answer to that. A friend of mine has recently started doing book photography. You mentioned a best-selling book. Many of the book publishers buy from a site called Archangel, Archangel, and he particularly focuses on creating images that can be used on book covers. So it's got space for the title and that sort of thing. And it's exclusive. This company is exclusive. So you've got to submit them only to them. But when he sells one, he gets about $400 or $500. But you don't sell that many, but it's sort of, you know, one sale at $400 and $500 can, you know, make quite a big difference to a month. And so if you were interested in taking pictures specifically for books, that's probably the best way to do it. It's a different sort of thing. They're often very moody. They're very sometimes processed in strange ways. And when you think about many paperback books, that it's not a straightforward picture of an airplane. You know, it tends to be a bit mysterious or a bit moody or something. So it's sort of an interesting genre of the whole stock game.
Yeah. Two other questions. On average, how many photos do you upload in a month?
It has been, if you look at this is, each of these is a month and this is the total number. So I had a period between 2017 and maybe the beginning of 2020 when the COVID thing came along, where I was probably uploading 100 a month, something like that. It's definitely slowed off because a lot of my images, if I go back to the picture I was going to go to, are travel-related images, travel and places. I do have things, you know, like the tie or the beer or the, I don't know, a light bulb that's here. But a lot of my images are travel and place related. And obviously with the whole coronavirus thing, that's rather stopped an awful lot of travel. And so I took some, a whole series of COVID related ones at the early parts of the, you know, when the virus started. So I did quite a lot of studio sort of work, but it's gone off recently. I've been focusing more on prints, which I'll come to, and also I've not been anywhere, so it's sort of, I don't have as many images to upload, but it was about 100, maybe 20 or 30 now, 15 or 20, I guess.
Okay, so a couple of other questions have occurred. And by the way, if at some point you feel like, hey, Joe, we're going to cover that a little bit later, you know, feel free to defer on answering the questions. One asked about, have any buyers requested a different version of the uploaded image? And while you think about that, I have a partial answer. Praveen, there is an emerging field for some photographers that will shoot what gets called private stock or corporate stock, where a company will say, we want to shoot stuff that looks like stock photos, but everyone needs to be wearing our surgical smock. So a good friend of mine—
More image brief driven. Yeah, yes.
That for a week at their pharmaceutical company. So that's kind of the answer to that.
Yes,
now,
yes.
Now
No, I haven't had any companies contact me to ask for something different. So that's my answer to that. This slide, this was 2017, and you know, places as we were talking about, various places I visited, and by 2021, this is my most popular images. I did a whole series about voting by mail, which proved very successful. You know, all these little stickers. This proved very successful as a Zoom background. This was like a cobbled together. I think 2 of these shells were from an old library in Spain, and I composited it and then blurred it slightly and sold it as a slightly blurred image as a background. And so that sold pretty well. These things are selling well because of 5G and 4G rolling out. These things with masks and eviction notices, I read quite a lot, and I realized that there was a whole thing bubbling up in the US about evictions, and they kept being put off because of the COVID epidemic, but eventually they all sort of started going through the courts. And so eviction notices became another one. Little coronavirus capsules and injections, COVID notices, sticker on your arm, Band-Aid on your arm. I tried to vote, this one says, so that was for the election issues. Vaping with, what's that one called, Juul. So my whole sort of set of images, and this is partly how I think I've kept being reasonably successful, is that I constantly think about what's going to be in the news that needs a stock photo. The war in Ukraine doesn't need stock photos, so that's tremendously in the news, obviously, as we know, but nothing about stock photos there. But the whole COVID thing with, if you remember, elbow bumps and fuck shakes and whatever that was, just wave, there were tons of opportunities for stock photos which no one had taken. So it was, can you get them online? Are they pretty good photos? And so I made a lot in 2020 and going into 2021 that were new images, not, the old stuff that kept selling. It was images I'd taken specifically because I thought that would be in demand. And so I think that's a big element of how to be successful these days, is you've got to spot the opportunity before it actually comes about. You got to be one of the first people to actually upload them.
A couple more questions for you. Let's see. Do you upload the maximum resolution for the pics you upload?
Not really. I now use a Sony A7R, and I think that does about 7,000 something pixels on the long side. I normally upload about 5,000 pixels, and I downscale them partly because it hides any small issues that might be there. I mean, I'd try not to have issues there, but downscaling does that. And also, I think that's more than resolution enough for what anyone wants to use it for. So I upload the maximum resolution to a fine art site so that it can be printed at the maximum size that the image can stand, but downscale to 5,000 pixels roughly for the stock sites, which is still well above the minimum. I think the minimums may be 3,000-ish pixels, something like that.
Yeah, it's, I will add, and I cannot remember the difference, but I know there's one popular site that has a minimum pixel or not pixel size, but file size, and then there's one that has a maximum. So they're looking for smaller stuff that would go on the website. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now another question that's really big, I think, for stock photography is, how do you know how much space to leave and where in the photo for magazines or book covers or titles?
With travel stuff, it's sort of less important, although I might leave more sky than you might if you're going to print it. For the other ones, it's just something that I just get a feel for, I suppose. Most of these don't actually have very much copy space because they're intended just to be used to illustrate an article rather than a product in that sense. So someone's writing about voting, well, they just use that. They don't do, they don't do anything with it. They just use it. So some of them I would leave space, and I maybe have it over the picture on the right-hand side and the space on the, the left. But it's just how it looks to me, I think is how I do it most of the time.
I would also like to add 2 cents on this. My anecdotal experience is that with people shots, it becomes more important to have a lot of white space because someone's more likely to download a picture of a person and then use that person to illustrate, frustrated with your bank, come to us. And I'll give you an example. Yeah. When Steve and I had set a date and I was going back to him to get some additional information. And I'm conveniently saying this so you can get a drink of your beverage and rest your voice.
Yes.
And,
that's right.
As Steve and I were trading emails saying, okay, give me a description for what you want the session to be, I found a picture of him, part of his stock photo work, on the CNN website for an ad where he's got scissors and he's cutting the cable. And the caption in the white space of the photo was, "Isn't it time to cut the cable?
Yes.
Alternatives to cable TV." Okay. Now, yes. That's a perfect example of, you'll see some of the photos that Steve has here where he looks befuddled or happy, or he's got a various expression. And those just scream for, I'm going to download this and then use it in ad copy. And so that's going to require going to require white space.
Yes. This is the app that I mentioned, MicroStocker Pro. So this shows my all-time bestsellers with the cat at first, then actually a bag of ice is the second one. And the total is 314,706 downloads of my images since I started putting there. So when I said there's a big market for this, there's a lot of people that have downloaded these images. There are alternatives. You can self-host your own stock photo site. I'll briefly mention that. Then there are these, I think you were mentioning, Joe, almost like a brief-driven site. There's one called Image Brief, but it's closed. But I did some photos for DoorDash of local restaurants. It was, you went and bought the food and you took 5 photos of the food to a particular design. These are they. Then you could obviously eat the food. It didn't pay much, but it was sort of interesting to test different local restaurants. So there are things like that you can, keep your eye on.
I'll tell you what, Steve, a question. I think you've got some more slides to go. What I was going to suggest is, let's call this like a half time. If anyone wants to take 2 or 3 minutes, including you, to do a quick bathroom visit, they can. Otherwise, during these 2 or 3 minutes, people can unmute and ask you questions directly.
Yeah, I'm happy to sit here, but you're right. We've got a few slides to go. I'll go quicker.
No. What's happening is we're getting a lot of good questions. So if anyone has a question they directly want to ask Steve, unmute and ask away. You've got them for 2 minutes now without me moderating and making a mishmash out of your question.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried uploading photos to Alme, and it's rather a lot of work to make it, quote, discoverable. You have to put so many tags on it. Is there a simple way to do that?
I'm trying to think what might be coming up, but there's an application that I use. So, well, first of all, you've absolutely got to describe and keyword the images. So many photographers, in fact, it's actually the next slide. So many photographers like taking photographs and processing photographs, and often I do it for like a bright contrasty feel. Then you've got to add this short caption and a more detailed description, and then 30 or 50 keywords. And if you don't put those keywords there, you might as well not upload them. I put the keywords into Lightroom. So all of my images that I have ever uploaded are all keyworded in Lightroom, so that if ever I want to find one, I can, search my own database and find a particular picture. And there are websites that you can put your own little search term in, and it comes up with all the stock photos that match that search term. Then you pick the images that most resemble yours and pick the keywords off those images. So in effect, if I pick 10 images that look, somewhat like mine, and then pick the keywords that I think best describes my image, I can copy those keywords into Lightroom and then add some specific ones of my own. So if it's, I would add the place. If it's a particular place, I would add the exact city and the location and the state and things like that. And then I would try and think of just one or two words that makes it a bit more unique to me. It's sort of like a long tail search thing that, not many people might be searching for that word, but if they do search for that word, they're likely to find my picture. So at the end of all this, I've got 30 to 50 keywords. I've got the caption, I've got the description, and there is another app called Stock Submitter, which automatically uploads to 20 or so agencies and automatically goes to those agencies and completes any activity that needs to be done on that agency. So when I do an upload, I simply click the button that says upload in this app, and I don't have to visit any site at all. I don't go to Alamy. It does all the clever Alamy stuff. I don't go to Shutterstock or anything else. It uploads a model release if a model release is required. And so it really is a, press the button and everything is done. And I think that means that I can support 15 or 20 agencies with no effort whatsoever, especially with the, the smaller ones. It's no effort at all to upload my images to, 20 sites, or no more effort than doing one, I should say. And so that, if you don't do that, you're, giving yourself a lot of pain. If you don't do the keywords, you'll never be found. So you've got to pay as much attention to this bit as you do to taking the photograph.
And Steve, if you repeat the name of that program, I will put it in chat for everyone.
Stock Submitter.
Stock.
And it's there's both a web-based version and like an online version. And you can submit, I think it's 30 images a month for free. And then for 10 euros a month, it's sort of like 200 images. So I currently have the 10 euro plan, but he's very responsive, although he's Russian. So just how responsive he is now, I'm not sure. He was very responsive, and it's a tremendous saving in terms of uploading images. Okay.
Another question that we have is, and I'll tell you what, we might as well restart the presentation here. But Alice asks, my father traveled the world and photographed with slide film. He left me his collection of photographs, which is very extensive. Can you still submit slides? And do you think 10 to 30-year-old photos of common travel spots would be in demand?
That's a good question, because I took slides for many years, and I made a slide copier. In fact, there's an article on my blog, Backyard Silver, about making your own slide copier using your camera. It's sort of, it gives a very, very good results. Certainly comparable to the normal scanning sort of stuff. The ones you'll be surprised as well about the quality of them, that it's nothing like a digital file. You know, however good the resolution of the scan is, slide film was not actually good when you compare it to digital cameras. But the ones that I think work are the ones that actually show that they are historical. So if you take a picture of like an old castle somewhere, and the castle looks exactly the same now, then what's the point of like a grainy old slide version of a castle that looks the same as, you know, a modern digital camera version now? So there's little point in doing that, to my mind. But if it's, say, I've uploaded some of holiday resorts on the Spanish around, I forgot what it's called, the Spanish area that wasn't very well developed when I went there. And so they're of historical interest because it shows how this particular, you know, resort in Spain, what it looked like in the 1970s. And that is of interest, maybe not a big seller, but it's of interest because it shows how different things are now. So I think if you use that sort of thought process, if it looks the same now as it did 30 years ago, well, why bother? Because there's much better pictures of it now. But if it's historically interesting because of the people, or it's not very crowded, or it's changed a lot, it could be worth doing.
Yeah, and to add to what Steve just said, Alice, there will be some sites that will reject photos because it's a recognizable location. So for instance, I submitted a bunch of stuff, if I leave to iStock, of the entrance to the Athens Olympic Stadium. And it got kicked back because there was obviously the Athens Olympic Stadium. On the other hand, I was told, and I just haven't followed up on this, that in the drama world, a lot of artistic designers, for instance, they'll try and project stuff with light rather than build scenery. And so they need pictures of, let's say, a city scene for what Baltimore or New York City looked like 50 years ago or 20 years ago, not today. Okay, so there will be some sites that will go, yes, we specifically want identifiable locations.
Yeah, and they accept them even though the quality, as long as, you know, if you put in the title, slide, something to say it was a 35mm slide, they accept the lower quality level because it's of interest. I think that's the important factor. Okay, shall we carry on?
We have one other question. Is there an app to generate keywords?
Well, only these various sites, and if you just search for like stock photo keywording tool, something like that, where you can, you know, look at a whole series of images, pick the ones that are close to yours, and it shows you the keywords in use order. So the most frequently used keywords, and you simply select maybe 25 of those and add to that list your own specific ones.
Alice, my experience has also been that it varies with the site. So for instance, I uploaded a picture of a bald eagle in a pile of wood in Central Florida. And some sites accepted raptor and others did not as a keyword. I mean, that's an example. Others accepted eagle, but not bald eagle. And others would accept bald eagle. So there's a certain amount of variation here.
Yes.
Which is why your Russian programmer sounds like quite a deal.
Yes, yes. Okay then. So what can you take? Well, you can take everything. Travel shots. Travel shots are sort of everywhere. So this one, $11,844 of this sort of pretty traditional. It was a nice sunrise, but you know, I'm sure many people have this in their portfolio. Some can be artistic. This one's sold around $1,300 from 1,381 downloads. The New River Gorge Bridge in West Virginia. This is where I live now, Morgantown. Pretty boring record shot, but it sold $261 from 242 downloads. So even, you know, places that aren't that popular, it's you know, people still, it's appeared on my local phone book, if you remember what those sorts of things were. So, you know, take them in your local town. Anything like that can sell. Generally, I try to keep them bright and happy looking, especially travel shots. People don't want to see a cloudy sky over a beach. No one's ever going to buy you know, this beach down at the bottom with the cloudy sky over it. Change the sky, but don't, you know, upload a picture that wasn't taken in the best of circumstances, because other people will have already uploaded ones that are actually, you know, a lot nicer than yours. With a good subject, take many shots of it. So the cat's got quite a few things taken. I've done things with, you know, old pair of glasses stuck on a Bible, and a picture of a lamp, because these aren't seen as much these days, the old tungsten sort of incandescent lights. So this one earned $1,087 and is used for some reason in a Deloitte page. You know, there's the image with all the black against it. No, talking about maintaining records of processing activities. I've done little lights from your Christmas tree. I've done cleaning glasses. I've done threading needles. I've done this good old bag of ice, which actually was quite tricky to take, because you've got to get, it's got to be lit quite cleverly to allow you to see all the shapes in the ice, actually. But $2,000. This was supposed to be a gluten, you know, dangers of gluten in bread. That's a skull, little lamb. And actually the lamb wasn't in this place. I've sort of composited that the lamb was in Australia somewhere, and this is in North Wales. But this was a much nicer place for the lamb to be running about. You can completely make up scenes. This was just some grass in my garden, and I put a different sky on it, and then I put a sun flare, and then I put the sheep there. That doesn't look very realistic. So you can, you know, take anything you want. As I mentioned before, try and anticipate the news. And this was a few years back, before I wish I bought some Bitcoin back in 2016 or whatever it was. I bought some little coins of them and took them in all sorts of ways, sort of stacked up, you know, against gold colored backgrounds, going into money boxes, into a pig, and they earned $1,700 by being there early. Not, you know, because eventually everybody took pictures of Bitcoin, but, you know, you need to be there and try to anticipate the news as opposed to being behind the news. The same with the opioids. I happened to find in an old medicine chest a bottle of opioids that I got from the dentist maybe 20 years ago that had never been used. And so I took all sorts of pictures of those. Some of them are editorial because you can see the name of the, I think it was OxyContin probably. Some are blurred enough that you can't really see what it is, and so they can be commercial. And so, of course, they sold and continue to sell because it's been in the news for the past 5 years at least. This was all the coronavirus stuff. So in 10 months, this set of images earned about $2,600, something like that. So this sort of shows that it's not my history in stock that's given me an advantage, because these are new photos. Anyone could have taken these at the same time as I took them. And so, you know, 2,600 just came from thinking of the idea and illustrating it in different ways.
So Steve, we have a question that's relevant to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked, does everyone's photo have an equal chance of being selected, or do buyers sometimes prefer established stock photographer shots?
I don't think, I mean, a buyer obviously could go to my portfolio, but I doubt very much if they did, because a buyer has an idea of a photo they want or a subject they want to cover, and that's what they would search for. They wouldn't say, oh, I wonder if Steve's got one of those. They would search for what the subject was. And also, I don't believe there's an advantage to me in the search order, because I've been there a long time. I think each image, when it gets uploaded, is given a chance at being seen. And then if it's actually picked up by anybody, that increases its chance of being seen again. So the stock agencies want to show new images because they want to keep it fresh, but they also then want to show successful ones so that people actually buy something, as opposed to seeing a lot of new stuff that, maybe not that good. So I think an image that I uploaded here of, voting or a mask or whatever had exactly the same chance of being sold as anyone else's mask image at that particular time.
And I would just interject, I think that the title of your photo and how descriptive it is, as well as the keywords that you put in,
yes,
are going to have far more impact than whether you have 2,000 or 10,000 or 200 photos on a stock site.
I agree. Yep. Stock video, I mentioned, I think this is still an opportunity. It's sort of becoming, like everything, a little, there's more competition there. The 4K videos in particular, are harder to do, and not many people were able to do it. So, making 4K videos of things is worthwhile. And there are many subjects still to be covered. So it's not like the photographs where there are millions and millions. There are less, but the usage is less. So they're used as, I think, what they call the B-roll in TV, which is, like a positioning shot or something like that, used in web advertising and news reporting. So I've had success with, again, some of the COVID ones. I've done some of the Bitcoin ones as videos. I've done some of the opioid ones as videos, and they sell. As you saw from that chart, it's maybe 10% of my income comes from video, maybe, something around that order, I would say. Okay. Selling fine art online. I've been trying to shift to this, partly because stock photos are, earning less, and partly there's a satisfaction from selling an image that someone has bought as a print. You sort of think, wow, they're going to put it on their wall. That feels better than someone putting a photo on a website somewhere. And there are many ways to sell online. There's 500px, which I've not had much success with. Fine Art America, Society 6, which are the two that I focus on particularly. There's Photo from Me in the UK, so they tend to be more European, UK oriented pictures. So I've earned, some numbers, 4,600 of Fine Art America, Society 6, 3,000, Photo from Me about 500. So it's a small part of the 334,000 I've earned since I started doing this thing, but it's sort of satisfying. It's more satisfying. So I've created now about 2,400 images on Fine Art America, and you can put them into collections. So there's like a West Virginia collection and a Hawaii connection, and a sort of more macro sort of California, Washington, DC. So within these, there are obviously the pictures to do with Morgantown or to do with West Virginia. And it costs it costs $30 for an annual fee for your account, and you can then have unlimited uploads. So sales come once, twice a month, but they can be $200, $300 profit on a large print. And what sells for me tends to be places, because it's very hard to describe an abstract thing, I think, in a way that someone would search for it. I think people search for gifts for people, for mementos of a vacation or a pleasant experience. And so I sort of think, well, someone could have graduated from WVU, which is in the town I live in. They could have a graduation gift of this sort of famous building that's part of WVU. So I tend to focus more on this sort of place related thing as opposed to flowers or, you know, birds, because there are just so many flowers and birds. There are fewer photos of Morgantown than you know, many topics. So, and I don't put generic stock photos there because I think that would, like a photo of me drinking a beer or something, because I think that would confuse the buyer and would never sell. Who would want that on their wall? Something like that. I've also just started an Etsy store, and I'm selling a download of a digital file. So if someone can't afford the $300 to have a big print of this thing, they can download the file and print it in Walmart and maybe be happy with that. But I've only been doing that for a couple of weeks. So that's sort of like a new venture for me, an Etsy store to do that.
Steve, a couple of questions for you and one reaction. What one person, well, actually two people that I know that are on Fine Art America, I got different pieces of advice. One person told me she makes beer money for the year. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's worth having, but she doesn't get rich. Yeah. The second person said most of his sales come, for folks who are not familiar with Fine Art America, you can order prints to be on T-shirts, on mugs, on stuff like that. And so he said his photos that sell the best are things that you might imagine on a coffee mug or a, you know, it's something along those lines. So again, different strokes for different folks. Yes.
I do get those sorts of sales, the coffee mugs, and it's sort of disappointing because you get like $5 or something for a coffee mug. But equally, I think there's, you know, it comes into the search order. How does Fine Art America organize the search? Well, they sort of organize it obviously by the keywords you search for, but more popular images get a bit higher. And so having sold as a mug a couple of times, there's a chance it comes higher in the search order. So you're absolutely right. It's sort of, you know, could I get the money I get from stock from selling fine art? No, I don't think I could. I can't see a way to do that unless I could really start selling a print for $7,000. And that's a whole different business, you know, trying to, you know, get to really wealthy sort of collectors. And so I see it more as I enjoy it. It's not too much work. It's sort of satisfying thinking of someone's, you know, got something on their wall. So I look at it like that, I think.
So two questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
One is that a lot of your photos feature you. Do you work with models?
No, partly because I'm not really that good a people photographer. I do practice it a bit, but I'm really not that good at it. And it's also, I can quite happily stand being laughed at as, you know, someone cutting that wire. It doesn't bother me at all if someone says, "Oh, look at you." That's, you know, it doesn't bother me at all. But not everybody's as comfortable with that. So I've stayed away from using models, and that's why I focused more on this places and things part of the business.
So, second question. Someone writes, I have seen the Saatchi online gallery. Is it part of the mix of candidate sites for selling photos?
I did look at that once, and I may actually have uploaded 10 or 20 images, but I don't think I've ever sold any. So I don't know how successful that is. You know, Fine Art America seems to be one of the biggest There's another called Pictorum, Pictorem, that I see people on Fine Art America also going there because they've got free shipping and they maybe price the prints a bit differently. And I'm sort of thinking I might put some there. But it's sort of, you've got to drive people to your images. It's not, you put them there and suddenly they sell. You've actually got to work on pointing people at them, whether you tweet the images, whether you join some Facebook groups. I joined a Facebook group about the town that I live in, and I put some photos there and I mentioned where they're available. And someone did buy I don't know, 36 by 24 inch print, and I made $300 or something on it, purely as a result of seeing the things that I'd put onto this Facebook group. So you've got to sort of market yourself. I think the stock agencies market the stock photos. I don't do anything to market a stock photo. With fine art, you do need to market your images or yourself, and that I'm learning to do that. I've written some blog posts on my website about things I've done that some were successful, some weren't. And so if anyone's interested in learning more, there's at least 3 or 4 articles about social media and fine art photography and, things I've learned, things I wouldn't do again type of thing. Okay. 3 slides to go, you'll be pleased to know. So
actually, almost everyone who signed on is still here.
All right.
So either they have not found a way to sign off, or they are eagerly eating up the content.
I need to top up this glass of wine. So can you start now? It definitely is harder than it was in the past. Many more images, many more contributors, lower prices per download, but I still download or get these images downloaded. I added about 1,000 in 2020, probably less in 2021 if I think about it. And those images, this was a special study I did to see whether you could start in 2020 and actually do something. And the 1,000 images that I actually added in 2020 sold 7,000 times for $6,000. And as I've said before, I don't think there's something about my portfolio that makes them sell better. So theoretically, someone could have started in 2020 and earned $6,000 from those images. And I was lucky on some of them. In retrospect, I was lucky. I took a good image and it got caught on and whatever. But if you hadn't had them there, then luck means nothing. You've got to, take things. So I think I have a talent for maybe seeing the opportunity and taking photographs that represent that opportunity before most people think about it. Maybe that's the talent that I've got, and I can take a good photo. I've practiced a lot. I can take good photos, but it's the subject that's important rather than the photo itself. Oh, so should you do it? I don't know. It's up to you. A lot of disappointments along the way, rejections, earnings per image dropping, but it does give you a steady, it's sort of like an annuity. It's like a pension in the sense that if I stop uploading images, and I haven't done as many recently, the money still keeps coming. It's sort of like you don't have to work for it. It's sort of like money that continues to come. You can set your travel and equipment against tax, and you can find fame and fortune of chocolate eaters more likely to be depressed, and there I am. So it doesn't bother me. If someone sees that, it doesn't bother me at all. It's sort of, but not everybody would be the same. So you need to, think about how your images might be used as well. So, and that was my little book. You can buy it on my website as well as on Amazon, backyardsilver.com. And that sort of goes through some of what we've talked about, but more detail about the individual agencies and keywording and things like that. So I'll take any questions. So I close my screen now. Everyone's written this down now, backyardsilver.com.
So what questions do people have for Steve where you can ask him directly? And while we're waiting for the questions to pour in, let me just reiterate something that Steve said where he was talking about, is this for you? I guess what I've found that's a big lesson, big insight, and actually, Steve, you had said this the first session, I heard you too, was that volume counts, that you're simply going to make a lot more money if you have 5,000 or 10,000 photos up rather than if you have 100 really good photos.
Yes, because you can never anticipate what someone, first of all, what catches on, like that one cutting the cord, which is a pretty cheesy picture. I mean, it's a pair of scissors cutting a cable TV cord, but it's all over the place. Now, just why that one caught on, I don't know. But, if I hadn't taken that, or if I'd, taken a proper one with proper wire cutters or something like that, which I think I did at the same time. But for some reason, the scissors one, caught on, whereas the cutting it properly with some wire cutters didn't. If you don't have multiple ones there, then there's not an opportunity to sell.
We've got a question that came in via chat, and it asked specifically about Switzerland, but I think we can expand this to other countries. It says, does Switzerland have similar rules to the US? People in public places, you can take their picture without permission. So that almost sounds like it's separate from stock. It's
release. So generally, I think the answer is yes, although there appear to be more restrictions on historic buildings in places like Germany and Switzerland. Now, just why or how, I'm less sure. So I think the question of should you upload images with people taken in sort of countries in Europe, I think it's getting a little sort of less clear. It's because of there's a lot more privacy laws that are appearing in Europe than there are in the US. So I think I would tend to focus more on there are people in the background, or it's a back view of someone. And I have quite a lot of pictures from Europe, so it's sort of never stopped me. I've been on river cruises and things like that, and I've lots of pictures that don't include people, or the people are sort of in the distance somewhere.
Now, another question, and folks, feel free at this point, you can unmute and ask Steve directly, but someone asked, if I took photos of last year's Halloween parade or Christmas parade, is it too late to upload them?
No, people often buy pictures 3, 4, 5 months in advance of when they're going to use them. And also, I took some, when I lived in Northern Virginia, I took the fireworks over the monuments in Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July. And I think I took those back in 2013, 14. There are videos as well as some stills. And those sell now because they're not dated in any way. The Washington hasn't changed, the monuments haven't changed, the fireworks look the same. So if someone, as long as it's someone not holding a sign saying 2021, which sort of dates it, it can still sell because no one really knows when it was taken.
Yeah, and to add to that, a lot of this is timing. So for instance, I took some photos after Valentine's Day a couple of years ago of some chocolate dipped strawberries, and 1 or 2 of them had been bitten into, and there was some black lace, and there was a chocolate heart, and there was a set of wine glasses. So sort of like a still life from a romantic thing. And so I posted it after Valentine's Day, didn't sell. Then I thought, as Valentine's Day was approaching, I thought, oh, I'll try uploading this to a couple more sites. And I uploaded it about, Steve said a couple of months. I think in this case, it was like a month ahead of time. And I got sales, not a lot, but sales on a bunch of sites, so that if you have something that's event specific, you want to upload it before the event if you can. People aren't going to be interested in the Christmas photo or the Christmas parade in January, but they might be the next November.
Yes, yeah, and certainly my fireworks have shown that. The fireworks sort of, and like the cherry blossom things I've got from Washington DC, they sell year after year, usually a bit earlier than now, because the cherry blossom scene is a cherry blossom scene. It's sort of doesn't change much from year to year.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Steve?
What's my motivation today? It's a good question, because I set up on my website, I mentioned that I think anticipating the news is more important than taking good photographs. And so I set up like a premium membership where I write blog posts just for people that are members of that. And what I've been writing about are things that I think should be taken, so often before I've taken them myself. And I've been doing it for 2 years now, and I'm thinking, do I really want to keep going with this? Is sort of, it turns it into work to some extent. So I think that's why I think I'm spending more time on the fine art part, because I like a nice, attractive picture, and I especially, think if that was printed, that would look good on someone's wall. So there's more satisfaction. I think I'm winding down the stock stuff and building up the fine art stuff. It's still photography, and when I travel somewhere again, I'll still upload pictures to the stock sites. But it's sort of, I'm more attracted now to the thought of doing more artistic work rather than little studio. I'm looking around at the flash guns around me, stuff in my studio, which is what this place I'm in now is.
Okay. Another question. I went to a pro-Ukraine demonstration at the White House, so there are definitely people in my photos with visible faces. These are okay to be uploaded as editorial photos? ?
Yes.
I don't have any model release forms.
Yes. Now, if you're standing in a public space and people are I'm not so sure that people need to be in a public space. If you're in the public space, then they're visible to you and they can be editorial photos and could well be picked up, but you need to get them there pretty quickly. And the ones that are probably the more useful are an image that someone could use multiple times, whether they're holding a sign and it's sort of, got some likelihood to be used this week as well as next week. Not really specific to that event, because you've missed it then. The news photographers were there, they've got what they needed. It needs to be a little more generic than that specific, demonstration on that specific day, I think, to be useful.
Hey, Steve, I have a question. This is Chris. Manassas Warrenton Camera Club, yeah.
Yes.
Does it matter, the phones are getting so much better with photography, with pictures. If you upload a photo from an iPhone, do you have to identify it as from an iPhone, or does it make any difference?
It doesn't strictly make any difference. That some sites, and Alamy is one of them, just doesn't like pictures from phones, even though, as you say, the quality is getting really good. But they also examine these photos at 100% resolution, sometimes 200%, I've been told. And phones tend to be lacking in the shadow areas, particularly on depends on the image, of course, and the lighting. And so I think it's sort of, they can tell when they look at it, and they can probably tell from the EXIF data, whatever it's called, as well. so many sites will accept them, but not all. And I think it depends on what the quality was like.
Hey, Praveen, do you want to ask your question out loud? Just unmute now.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, Steve, do you strip the metadata from each of the photographs before you upload to these sites, or do you keep certain copyright data, your name?
I do have that in the metadata, the copyright, and also the camera model and that sort of thing probably goes into the file as well. And that does go forward with the file. What the buyer actually gets is up to the agency. So the buyer may not ever see my name in the file. I think they might, because sometimes you see, you know, this photo came from Shutterstock Steve Heap, and sometimes you just see Shutterstock, you know, in the little credits of an image somewhere. Right. And I don't know what rules the agencies try to apply, to be honest, and whether people follow them is of course the other matter as well. So I don't deliberately try and strip anything out, and I do put a copyright thing in there, sitting in the metadata.
Okay,
thank you, Steve.
And Joanne, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I was just wondering, because they look so closely at the resolution, is this more a thing they're looking for a full frame camera versus, you know, I know a lot of people shoot with crop sensors. There's a lot of people out there, micro four thirds.
No, all of those would be fine. I think it's just that the sensor on a phone is so small, you know, even compared to any sort of camera. But basically any professional, semi-professional camera would be fine. And also that downscaling that I do, you know, you could quite happily downscale to 4,000 pixels and they would still be accepted by all of the agencies. So absolutely you can use a crop camera.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Steve?
Time to go.
Okay, I'll tell you what, Steve, I think we're going to call this a wrap.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
A bit more than the 45 minutes.
No. Well, you got a lot of questions because you provided a lot of great content and stimulated folks. Thank you again for your time and your expertise. And folks, if you thought this was valuable, you need to check out his book. I'm serious. It's very inexperienced, it's very inexpensive. It's a quick and easy download, whether you get it through Amazon or through his own site. And that way it'll be a reference for you. So seriously, you should look at that.
Okay.
Steve, thank you. And thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, all of you there.